is the independent senator from Maine, Angus King. He does caucus with the Democrats. More importantly, he's a member of this Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator King, it's good to see you. I want to put up a statement from the current acting chair of the Intelligence Committee. It's Marco Rubio. And here's what he said. We can say without any hesitation that the committee found absolutely no evidence that then-candidate Donald Trump or his campaign colluded with the Russian government to meddle in the 2016 election, unquote. Senator King, do you agree with Senator Rubio's assessment? And if you do, then what part of Paul Manafort is not part of the Trump campaign?
I don't agree with that statement. I don't know whether Marco Rubio read the same report I did, but here, for an example, you touched on this. At the time that Paul Manafort was the campaign chair, there's a documented meeting with Konstantin Kilimnik, now we know a Russian intelligence agent, where he handed over detailed polling data, internal polling data. And here's one of the problems, Chuck. Those of us in the political business understand when you hear the word polling data, it means more than who's up and who's down and whether Hillary's ahead by 2 points or Donald Trump by 5 points. Detailed internal polling data is a roadmap of the campaign. It's a blueprint. Where are you strong? Where are you weak? What are the issues? What demographics? What geographic areas? What are the battleground states? That's about as clear a coordination, if you will. It was an invitation to the Russians. Here's how you can help us. Now, again, I disagree with Marco Rubio's statement. I just think the facts speak for themselves. And you were talking about Roger Stone's role. There's also a telling moment in the report where Rick Gates, who was Manafort's assistant, was in the car with Donald Trump on the way to LaGuardia. He remembers it in detail. Trump is on the phone with Roger Stone. And he turns at the end of the conversation to Gates and says, there will be more coming from WikiLeaks. Well, that's a pretty clear indication that candidate Trump, via Roger Stone, knew what was going on. So I don't agree with Marco Rubio's characterization to say there was no, I mean, the key, is it cooperation? Is it a conspiracy? Is it coordination? Is it collusion? I don't care what you call it, but the reality is that there were these multiple contacts that are detailed in this 1,000-page report that make it clear that the government, that the Trump campaign was involved in coordinating in some way, shape, or form with the Russians.
Senator King, you know the phrase "justice delayed is justice denied." The timing of the release of this report arguably couldn't be better for Donald Trump, if you will, right? Can come across as old news. Oh, we're way past that. Where are all these other things? What took so long? Why did this take so long to get out to the public?
Well, one of the reasons it took so long, Chuck, was that it's comprehensive. We went through literally, I think, 1 million pages of documents, hundreds of interviews, and there were places along the line where we were stonewalled by the White House, where they were exerting executive privilege for things that happened before the president was the executive, before he was elected, and that certainly slowed things down. So we wanted to do it fairly and straightforwardly and really go into sufficient detail. But this isn't only a historical document. This is there are a set of recommendations back around page 930, I think, about what we should do in the future. And one of the most important to me is, if you're in a campaign and you are offered help or assistance or intervention by a foreign government, you report it to the FBI right then. You don't assess whether it's good or bad or whether it'll help you. You report it right then. And we've tried to get that into law, haven't been able to.
Senator King, please stay with me a minute. I want to come back to you on this topic, but we have some important breaking news involving the post office, so please don't turn off our connection, because I do want to come back. Well, we've just learned the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, just days before he's going to be grilled on Capitol Hill, is now backing off of these controversial changes to the agency's operation until after the election. In a statement just released moments ago, he says, quote, "I came to the Postal Service to make changes to secure the success of this organization and its long-term sustainability. I believe significant reforms are essential to that objective, and work toward those reforms will commence after the election. In the meantime, there are some long-standing operational initiatives efforts that predate my arrival at the Postal Service that have been raised as areas of concern as the nation prepares to hold an election in the midst of a devastating pandemic. To avoid even the appearance of any impact on election mail, I am suspending these initiatives until after the election is concluded. Jeff Bennett joins me now. Jeff, wow, I guess a little bit of political pressure goes a long way these days.
Political pressure and pressure from the American people, Chuck, because remember the concerns about the delays at the U.S. Postal Service extended beyond those ballots. It was retirees who had been waiting for their checks. It was small business owners who'd already been slammed by the pandemic, who were doubly slammed by these shipment delays. And it was those U.S. veterans who normally had to wait 3 to 4 days, typically for medication to come through the mail from the VA, who in many cases were waiting 3 to 4 weeks. And so now Postmaster General, a Senate hearing on Friday and a House hearing on Monday, is doing the thing that I've heard from postal workers that have been calling on him to do, is to reverse those policy changes, reverse those budget cuts and crackdowns that had led to those delays. And so now, as you just read in that statement, he's saying he's putting on pause those changes until after the election, Chuck.
That certainly I would call letting some steam out of the valve, and certainly making both of those hearings now probably a little less politically fraught with peril at a time. We saw the president was upset this was going to happen on day one of his convention. I have to say, you could sort of see how all of this may have suddenly happened. Jeff Bennett with that breaking news. Jeff, thanks very much. Since I still have you on the hook, Senator King, I got to get your reaction on this development. I know that you, coming from a rural state of Maine in particular, the Postal Service is pretty popular with your constituents.
Well, my first reaction is, amen. Thank goodness he's seen the light, because Maine is a rural state. We've got elderly people that determine, the post office delivers 4 million prescriptions a day around the country. I mean, talk about a place where you don't want to slow things down. We've got elderly people, we've got Social Security checks, VA. So thank goodness he's made this change. And it's too bad it took a public uproar and a beating from members of Congress, but at least he's seen the light. And let's hope that we can now proceed on a more orderly basis after the election.
Right. Well, and this is actually going to come to a larger philosophical argument. And I'm curious where you stand on this, which is it's the United States Postal Service, as some would like to argue. It's not a business. And so what would you define as solvency for a service that people rely on as a government service, not as a business?
Well, there are two things to say about that, Chuck. The one thing is that the post office, on an operational basis, at least before COVID, was on pretty close to a break-even basis. The problem with the finances of the post office is an arbitrary requirement that Congress imposed in 2006 that they pre-fund 75 years of pension and medical benefits. Nobody else in our society has to do that. That's costing them something like $5 billion a year, and that's what's put them in the hole. That's what's put them in the red. So that's number one. If we can fix that, which we should have before now, then the financial situation is entirely different. Secondly, just as you said, this isn't a business. We're delivering individual letters to individual houses in rural places all over America. There's no way that's going to make economic sense, but it makes good infrastructure sense. It's one of the bases of the country. Ben Franklin realized that. That's why it's in the Constitution. And so, to say, it's got to make a profit. The Army doesn't make a profit. The Department of Agriculture doesn't make a profit. Give me a break. This is a public service. And it's crucial to the continuity of people being able to function in this society. Right.
I'm sure you've never heard a constituent complain, you don't charge enough for the mail. You should be charging a lot more. Senator, I want to go back to the intel report. And the reason I ask about timing is when we look at what the Russians are doing now, and we look at what even this report indicates was part of the operation after the election, which was to try to, one of Manafort's jobs was to try to erase the Russian fingerprints on the interference and try to create a Ukraine angle to the story, which of course we ended up in an impeachment trial over. My point is this, Senator King, Wouldn't this report have been pretty helpful to the 100 United States senators that served as jurors, say, 5 months ago?
Yes, I think it would have, Chuck, although let's be realistic. The outlines of what we reported today were available then. People knew about it. The Manafort delivery of the polling data that I mentioned was in the Mueller report. The conversation about the WikiLeaks was in the Mueller report, although the part about Roger Stone was redacted. But okay, let's be realistic. I'm not sure anything that came out would have changed the result of that trial. I mean, the Republican senators had made their decision, and that was what they were going to do. And, you know, I was one of those who said, well, let's get John Bolton, let's get some more evidence. But ultimately, I thought it was pretty clear that, you know, nothing other than Deus Ex Machina would have changed the outcome of that non-trial. It wasn't a trial. I've never heard of a trial with no witnesses.
So what should you know, this is a 1,000-page report. A lot of Americans aren't going to read all 1,000 pages. What do you want Americans to read of this report? If you told them, take 10 minutes, do your citizens' homework today, what's the 10 minutes of reading you would tell them to do on this report, sir?
Well, I think with the 10 minutes, I'd tell them to go to page 930 and start reading the recommendations about what we should do to prevent this from happening in the future. And then I think there are going to be a lot of news accounts. There are going to be a lot of summaries out there that I think will be helpful. But I think people ought to dip into it and see it. But the conclusion is, I think, pretty clear that there was a relationship. And the most important thing, Chuck, is that we know when this is happening to us. That we know we can shrug it off. We can say, oh, it's just the Russians again. And one of my passions right now is persuading the intelligence community to tell the American people what they know between now and November. If they tell us in February, it doesn't matter. That's history. Their clients, this is what I said at a hearing the other day, the customers of the Intelligence Committee are usually the president, the national security advisor, the secretary of defense. The customers of the intelligence community right now are the people of the United States. They're the decision makers on November 3rd. They ought to have the information.
I'll put it another way. You're our FDA. You got to tell us, where is there risk in where we're getting information? Where is there risk when it comes to this interference? Anyway, absolutely agree. Senator Angus King, we got to protect this democracy. Independent senator who caucuses with the Democrats from Maine. Thanks for your perspective on this, sir.
Thank you, Chuck.